Tom, the book of Revelation in the end of the New Testament claims that the grand finale, the last part of the fourth movement of the symphony of God's creation, is the new heaven and the new earth. Interesting parallelism. What does that literally mean, as far as we can tell?
Yeah, I mean, the word literally is self-problematic, as you will be aware philosophically. Interestingly, that phrase, new heavens, new earth, goes back to the end of the book of Isaiah, or Isaiah, as you Americans would say, in the Old Testament. And many scholars actually see that as related to the promise in the Old Testament of the rebuilding of the temple, because the temple is the place where heaven and earth come together. Genesis itself is about the creation of a cosmos, which is a temple, a heaven and an earth, with God dwelling there and the image in the temple. And the end of the book of Revelation is itself the description of a giant temple with the city like the Holy of Holies. It's a cube, and it looks as though the temple is the overarching image which we are given to understand this. And here's the problem for us modern Westerners, because, as I often say to the students, the default mode in our culture, in Western culture today, is Epicureanism. It's the first time in history that that's been true, by the way, because it was just an elite minor option before. And Epicureanism, heaven is split from earth completely. The gods may exist, but they're a long way away, and who knows, and they don't care. And that's just the total antithesis of the ancient Jewish perception, which is that heaven and earth are made for one another. They are radically compatible, and that if we don't see that, then that's our problem. But that then, in Christianity, Jesus is the place where heaven and earth have converged, and the Holy Spirit is the one whose breath comes, as it were, from heaven to revivify the earth. That's what the beginning of Acts is all about. It's the new coming together of heaven and earth, which is why then all the pressure points in Acts are where there are temples, surprisingly. So what we're thinking about is a new creation in which God's space and our space are joined together permanently and visibly, if you like, for which the only model we have is Jesus himself, which is scary because Jesus is, what do we say about Jesus? But there's a to and fro when we're thinking about the new world. God will do for the whole creation what he did for Jesus at Easter. That's one way of putting it.
When you say the whole creation, what do you literally mean? Do you literally mean the whole creation that we see, all physical reality, which could be multiverses?
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure about multiverses. I don't understand that language really, but certainly, I mean, the vast recesses of intergalactic space, whatever. Yeah, and because I don't know very much about those vast recesses, I don't know very much about what it would mean for God to renew them. But we can start with where we are, which we do know a certain amount about, and there it really does seem that the promise is for a physical renewal and for, I mean, there's that lovely promise in the Hebrew Bible about the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That's in Habakkuk 2, echoed in Isaiah 11 as well. And it says, as the waters cover the sea, there's a sense of a new fullness. And I think we can only really get at this through art and music and poetry, because it's about imagining a world which is like this, but pulsating with a different dimension of life. And that's something which one does sometimes glimpse in great art and great poetry and music.
Does this mean a literal, radical intervention by God, or is it sort of the long-term improvement of the world through human efforts, and God is sort of being involved and will eventually evolve towards this more utopian situation?
Great question. Interestingly, that question I've discovered quite recently is, the way you put it, is a reflection of the tension which is there in the 19th century in German and French philosophy, where you get a Hegelian movement, which is that everything is just evolving and developing, and a Darwinian movement as well, if we're going anywhere. But then you've got the revolutionary movement, both political and then sort of cosmic, where actually, no, what has to happen is this big bang has got to come in. And it seems to me that we have framed our philosophical and theological questions ever since then in that either or. And I think the Bible tells us a story which includes both but transcends both. Because if you talk about intervention, it implies that God is not actually around and doing stuff anyway, which would be very odd from a biblical point of view. But if you then say, so is it just a process, then you end up with Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who just saw a steady evolution, and then you get to an omega point, which has all sorts of problems about it. What about all the mess on the way, and so on? I think this is actually what Walter Benjamin was wrestling with in the 30s. Very interesting stuff, that he was talking about the necessity for resurrection. And I think he meant that in as much a socio-political as a theological sense. But so it's all about the Spirit who was brooding over the waters at the beginning of creation, has never actually abandoned creation, but is going to do something new. So there's something which has to happen which is new, but it will be seen to be, in retrospect, the shocking fulfillment of the old. And I think this idea of shocking fulfillment is as good as I can get for saying both of those things together.
It would seem on the surface that both of those things together are contradictory, because either it's going to be a story that God, working through humans and through all the problems we've had, will Grinch approve, and then we reach this omega point where we now recognize with all the struggle, we're here, and this is what God intended, and God was there all along helping. Or what is more common in, shall we say, Christian eschatology in America, which I'm more familiar with, is that the human endeavor, not getting better and better, is getting worse and worse.
Exactly.
So that God's going to have to intervene to prevent human from wiping each other.
Again,
totally
we have to tell the story. In the 17th and early 18th century, people thought the world was going to get better and better, and that the gospel would thrive. And by the end of the 18th and early 19th century, we've moved towards that dualism where it's just getting worse and worse. And it's neither of those. We are given tasks to do, but when God does the new thing which he's going to do, then those tasks will be seen to have made their own important but not total contribution to the eventual situation.
And that's a very different view than the view that things are getting worse and worse, so that God will have to intervene in order to save us. So it won't be a matter of just putting the final cherry on the cake,
quite.
But it will be making the whole cake anew.
Paul says at the end of 1 Corinthians 15, which is a passage about resurrection, that what you do in the Lord is not in vain. In other words, your present work is not wasted. How it will be taken up and used in the new world, we are not given to see.